Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. Welcome to the .NET Show, Part 2 of Building a Mobile Podcast App for .NET Rocks, a weekly podcast for .NET developers that I co-host with Richard Campbell. Today we're picking up where we left off last week. Right now we have an app that can download and play an MP3 file and also allow us to stop. Today we're going to add offline support, letting us cache the MP3 files we download and play files from the cache. We'll also connect to the podcast feed for .NET Rocks as our source of data, including URLs to each episode's MP3 file. Each week, I share the code in a cookbook for you to follow in this GitHub repo. So without writing a symphony about it, let's jump into Part 2 and start composing. And that's coming right up on the .NET Show. All right, so we're picking up where we left off last week, which was we were at the point where we were running our application and it was downloading and playing. And for now, I'm going to just show this to you running on my Android phone. So here we go. I'm going to press the play button. Downloading. There it is playing through my phone speaker. We have the time remaining and the stop button. And that's it. And if I play again, it's downloading again and playing. And I can stop it. All right, so now that we know how to play and stop and do the time remaining and all that, let's move on to the next bit, which is offline support. So one big reason for using a podcast player app rather than just going to a website or listening on your own is offline support, or being able to listen to episodes when you have no internet connection, like if you're in a plane or something like that. Now, I know planes have Wi-Fi these days, but bear with me, you don't always have network support. So what's going to happen is when we hit a play button, we're going to see if we have this file in a local cache. And if we do, we'll play it from the cache. But if we don't, then we'll download it and add it to the cache. So we only really need to download any given episode once. So for this feature, we're going to use a library called Monkey Cache. So what we're going to do is go to our solution, and we're going to select Manage NuGet Packages for Solution. And we'll go browse for Monkey Cache .file store. Now take a look at who wrote this. That's right, it's our old friend James Montemagno. So again, we're going to add Monkey Cache file store to all three projects. Hit the install button. There we go. So now let's pay attention to the main view model. We need to do some stuff here. We're going to add some using statements to the top of the class here. We want our Monkey Cache file store. We want system.io because we're going to write to files. We want system.net, and we want Xamarin Essentials. Now, in the next step, we need to download our MP3 and put it into a cache directory. And that cache directory is going to be different on different platforms. And that's why we're using Xamarin Essentials, because it has a great feature that just abstracts the cache directory from us. So the first thing let's do is add a cache dir string right there. And now we're going to add a couple of lines of code to the main view model constructor. So barrel of monkeys, monkey cache. Yep, that's right. The barrel is the sort of the top level class here in Monkey Cache. So we're telling it that we have a unique application ID of mobile_DNR. And then from the file system in Xamarin Essentials, we're getting the cache directory. And as I said, that's going to be different on different platforms. So let's take a look at in the iOS platform. This is from Apple. where that cache directory points to on an iPhone. So we scroll down and we see this caches folder. It says to use this directory to write any app-specific support files that your app can recreate easily, and that your app is generally responsible for managing the contents of this directory and for adding and deleted files as needed. Now, look at this. In iOS 2.2 and later, the contents of this directory are not backed up by iTunes or iCloud. In addition, the system removes files in this directory during a full restoration of the device. And later than iOS 5, the system may delete the caches directory on rare occasions when the system is very low on disk space. So you should just be aware of that. Now, as for Android, app-specific storage is where the cache is located, and there's a get files dir or get cache dir for that. So under the hood, that's exactly what James is doing here. And there is no indication on Android that this cache directory will be deleted, but who knows? You really can't count on it. But the good news is the way we're going to use it is if it's not in the cache, it gets downloaded. So no matter what, the application will be usable. But in the rare occasion where the caches get cleared, maybe the user clears the cache, clears all their offline files, it gets reset, they will be re-downloaded. So that's good. All right, so now we're going to need a Boolean property in the view model here to let us know whether or not the file that we're downloading and running and playing is cached. And that's going to be called isCached. So in order to look for the file in the cache, we need to know what the file name is without the URL address part and the path to the file in the cache. And we also need a file stream that we're going to keep outside of all these methods, because we want to be able to dispose of it when we're done playing. So let's go back up to the top here and add a few fields. So here's our cached file name, which we'll figure out. The file name only is just o1-guard1.mp3. That's right here at the end. And then we have this systemio.filestream, local file stream. Okay, now let's get the cached file name right here in the constructor by combining the path, the cache dir, and the file name only. Now we're going to initialize the isCached property by checking to see if the file exists in the cache. And if it does, isCached will be set to true. Next, we need a routine for downloading the file. It's called download file. We pass it the URL. We have a web client, and that gives us a download data completed event, which we can handle right here in line, where we're going to take the cached file name, and result is a byte array. We're going to write that byte array to that file and set isCached to true. And then, of course, we're going to initiate the download right there, download data async. Now, we do have to modify our perform play method. Remember, perform play is what the command is connected to. And this is what it is currently. Let's just update it a little bit and then we'll go over it. So the first thing we're going to do is set isPlaying equal to true. And if the file is not in the cache, we're going to play it from the URL. So we'll set current status to downloading ... We'll play it, and then we'll download the file using the code I just showed you above. Otherwise, it's in the cache. We're going to set the current status to playing from cache. We're going to set the local file stream to file open read, cache file name. In other words, this will open the file for read only and return us a file stream. And then we can actually use the cross-media manager to play from that local file stream. So here it's playing from a URL where it's downloading and playing. And then here it's playing from a local file stream. And we also have to give it the file name only. Now, when we stop, perform stop, we're also going to have to set a few things here. We're going to set isPlaying to false. We're going to set the current status to an empty string, just like before, and we're going to stop. But here, we're going to check to see if that local file stream is not null, and if it isn't, we'll dispose of it. Now, the only thing left we need to do is dispose the file if we don't press stop, but the file finishes playing after 5 minutes. And that's when media item finished fires. And here we're setting current status to nothing as before and is playing to false. But we're also just disposing that local file stream if it is not null. All right, so let's bring this back and run it again on my phone. All right, so hit play and it's downloading. There you can hear it playing. Now I'm going to hit stop and play again. Now watch what happens. Playing from cache. Nice, huh? Now what happens if I turn on airplane mode and go back and try to play again? Haha, tricked you. We still have access to it because it's in the cache. And that does it for that feature. So now let's go down the rabbit hole of dealing with multiple files in a list. Now we could be pulling these from RSS feeds, but in this case, .NET Rocks has its own public API that we can use to get more information about an episode than is standardly available in an RSS feed. So the first thing we need to do is add a models folder to our UI project. And we're going to add to it a whole bunch of model files. So let's go through these. First, we have a file. We have a guest. A link. We have a sponsor. We have a tag. We have show details, which gets all of this stuff for a particular show. And we have a show, which has all of the most of the information that we're going to show, including show details. Now remember, we're just downloading and displaying data. We're not going to be updating. We're not going to be adding. This is not an admin program. It's a consumer program. So there are some other models in the admin side that do all that associate things. But we're just using these to display data in our application. Now we need an API service, don't we? So let's create a services folder, and we'll add a file called API service. So we've got an HTTP client. We have a show name because the API takes the show name so that we know which show we're getting data about. And there are more shows in the PWOP podcast network than .NET Rocks. And here's the base URL. It's PWOP client API.azurewebsites.net/shows. And here's the constructor where we create the HTTP client using that base address. And now we have a get all shows, which just does a generic get and gets all the shows. Now there's over 1,700 shows, so it's a lot of metadata, and it takes a second. Then we have a get count, which gets the number of shows. We have a get range. And we have a get show details. So that's pretty much all we need. Now I'm going to make some significant changes to the view model. Let's start at the top. So we have this property, and I'll go to the bottom to show it to you, all shows, which is a list of show objects. And we're using the standard, set property method, which is going to do a notify property changed. So it doesn't have to be an observable collection or anything like that. So let's scroll up and look at this load all shows. So we're calling load all shows from the constructor. And this goes and calls the get all shows method on the API service and returns that list. And we're just going to take this just to show that it works, right? We're just going to find the first show and get the show details for it. Because we don't want to download the details for every show right away. That's just a lot of unnecessary data. unless we plan to look through and play all of them at once. So the idea is that when we select a show, then we're going to get the details, and then we'll be able to show all this stuff. So we'll use the current status text, which is shown in a label, the number of shows that were downloaded, the title of the first show, the first guest in the first show, their name, and the URL of where the file can be downloaded. Now, here's something interesting. When you get just the list of shows, each one of them, the show details file will be set. So you don't have to get all the details just to play a particular MP3 file. I did that on purpose. That is part of just the basic data. But remember, show details has links and sponsors and guests and their photos and all of that stuff. So we don't necessarily need all that unless you ask for it specifically. So this is how we're calling this async load all shows from the public main view model, which is the constructor, which is not async. So this is a nice little snippet of code that you might want to use in other places in Xamarin Forms, just to run asynchronous methods from synchronous methods. All right, now we're going to make some significant changes to the main page XAML. And here it is. The only thing we're really doing is changing this stack layout here to just show the current status. I don't want a play button. I don't want any of that stuff. I just want to show the current status. All right, so let's run it again, but this time let's just use the emulator. 1733 is the total count. Shows downloaded. First show title, Smarter Testing using Verify with Simon Kropp. The first guest is Simon Kropp, and the file can be downloaded at this URL. So now that we know how to get all the data, we have to do some deep modification of the UI in order to view it all. So to do that, I'm going to show you how to download and install the free set of Xamarin Forms UI controls. So we're going to go to devexpress.com/Xamarin/free-offer or devexpress.com/free-Xamarin. And I'm just going to fill out this form. So I'm going to accept the policy, create an account. And then what happens is you get an email that has your instructions for creating your NuGet feed. And in general, it involves going to Tools, Options, NuGet Packages Manager, Package Sources, and you have to add your DevExpress package source right there. And that's why you get that key. Now, once we have access to the DevExpress NuGet, we're going to go to the solution and manage NuGet packages. And we're going to select the package source as being DevExpress. And I will browse for devexpress.xamarinforms.collectionView. So this is just a way that it's sort of like a list view on steroids. It has some great features, and I want to use it in my project. Again, we're going to add it to all 3 projects. Yes. Now going back to the main page XAML, I'm going to significantly change this. So I've added this namespace here, DXCV, right out of the documentation. And now I've got my collection view as the main container. Inside that, I have an item template for each item. And now I have a data template because we're binding. I have a stack layout, so this is for each show. For each show, we're going to show the show title, and then horizontally, we're going to show the number and then the date published in a short date format. And then under that, the description. Now, what's interesting is that this item source is binding to all shows. So that is using the binding context of the page. But when you use a data template, you're using the binding context of each item in all shows. So this would be, remember, this is a list of show objects, so that these properties are on the show itself. That's what this binding is for. So when we run this, we should see something like this. There it is. So now we can scroll through all the shows and read all the data. And yeah, notice that when you see that little dot right there, that's the scroll bar. It's very small. There's a whole bunch of show data right here. Okay? Now, here's a tip. If you get some weird errors that you don't understand and it won't compile and you're getting some strange errors, try this. Go to your UI project, click this button, Show All Files, and you'll see the bin and object files. Go ahead and delete those. I had to find that out the hard way, and of course, I've known this little trick for years doing Visual Studio development, but sometimes that is just necessary. Here's another trick. You can right-click and say Clean Solution. I don't even know what that does, but it does seem to clear up some compile errors at some point. All right, so the next step and the final step is to implement code to play an episode using the MP3 file that we get from the data. So it's a little bit different because if you notice in our main view model, we've got like an is playing property and an is cached property, right? And those are just sort of general, but we kind of want to move them and associate them with each file. So we're going to just start by, we're going to leave all this stuff here, but I'm going to modify my perform play like so to accept a URL. So rather than hard coding the URL and the file name, we're going to now get the file name only from path.getFilename, and then the cached file name from that. So this will be able to play any URL you give it. Now, of course, it's going to give us a problem here because we have to pass the URL to perform play. Well, how do you do that? So I command allows you to create parameters. So all I have to do is create an async command of string. And now perform play can take that parameter and it can be passed. Now that means a couple of things are obsolete here, like this and this. So let's fix that real quick. We don't need the cached file name here, and we don't need this, and we don't need that. So that's enough surgery on the view model for now. Let's focus on the XAML. All right, quite a few changes here. All right, this is all still the same at the top. My converter is still there. But now, instead of having the collection view as the outside view, I have a stack layout. And that is so I can put a label at the top that is bound to current status. And remember, this is just like we had before. The isVisible property was bound to isPlaying. And basically, it's going to show that current status, which is the time update. And below that, we have the list. So this is going to stay at the top of the screen. And then we'll have the list below it. Now, there's a whole bunch of new binding stuff in here. We still have the play button that is binding is playing in the converter. But notice this line right here, source. So this says rather than binding to the item or the show, we want to bind to the main view model, right? Because that's where is playing is. All right. So the same thing for stop. We're using that source to bind to the main view model. Now the commands also are bound to the view model, play. And then we have this command parameter, which is showdetails.file.url. So that's the URL. That is how we pass that URL to the command play. All right, now let's run it again. All right, here we go. Now, This is a good start, but it's hardly ideal, not just from the UI standpoint, but a functionality standpoint. We shouldn't have hundreds of play and stop buttons, for example. Well, the play button I can understand, but we don't need to have them all say stop, right? But in the next episode, we'll create an information page for each show that will use the button here to bring us to that info page. And that will either immediately start playing or we can play it from there. And we'll be also able to show all the other information that we got about the guests and the sponsors and all of that stuff. And maybe even some feedback mechanism. And we'll do that next week. Back to you in the studio, Carl. Thanks for watching. Please visit blazertrain.com and the .NETshow.com for more great content.